Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are, dear friends. It's a pleasure to have you with us today as we are launching 6 new booklets that Reverend Naim has been working on during the time of, during last year and this year, during the time of the pandemic. For me, 3 things that are I really like about Sabil. One thing is the community of friends, whether it is locally or internationally. It is amazing how the Sabil movement has brought so many different people together to form a new family that is based on justice, love, inclusivity, and nonviolence. We are a group of people around the world who are united in the passion to see justice be done in Palestine and Israel. I have also been very much influenced with Reverend Naim. He is a true leader. He is a good man. It is like when I first applied to Sabil to work many years ago, I asked, who is Reverend Naim? And the most common answer that I have received, he is a good Christian. And I came to realize this when I came to encounter Reverend Naim. He is a source of inspiration to many people around the world, and especially here for our Palestinian Christian community. But also what makes me very passionate about Sabil is the theology. It is our struggle, our challenge, trying to understand the word of God and remaining faithful to Jesus Christ, especially at a time of occupation, injustice, a time that is very difficult for people to live around the world, but especially over here in Palestine as we continue to live under decades of Israeli military occupation. Many of our communities remain to be refugees waiting to come back to their homeland. It's a pleasure to introduce Cedar Daibes. Cedar Daibes, or as we call her at Sabil, Auntie Cedar. She is a very strong and inspiring woman. She is a co-founder of Sabil, and she is the mother of Sabil for us, the small community who are the staff at Sabil. We're always calling her, consulting with her. Even sometimes her daughters complain. They're saying, "You're asking too much from our mother. She is no longer 50 years old or 40 years old." And immediately she comes in and she grabs the phone and the conversation starts about how we can be really more effective with our work. So Auntie Cedar.
Thank you, Omar. Thank you. So what I'm going to tell you now is a lecture that was given by the Reverend Dr. Naim in memory of the late Dr. Michael Pryor, and it is entitled Palestinian Liberation Theology. So I believe that the importance of this lecture is that it opens our eyes to new dimensions of our faith and new ways of living it out. I believe that this paper is only an introduction, and that reading more on the themes mentioned in this paper through Naim Atik's books and other writings, and also through scholarly writings by the late Dr. Michael Pryor, for whose memory this lecture was given on the 10th anniversary of his untimely death. Justice and truth are the hallmarks of all liberation theologies. Where they differ is the context. Palestinian liberation theology is both contextual and liberational because it has implications that are wider and broader than that one context. Its fundamentals can be used in other contexts that are marred by injustice and oppression, as well as by inherited biblical interpretations and understandings that continue to be politically damaging to the Palestinian people and others. All liberation theologies have 3 components: faith, context, and action. Palestinian liberation theology initially developed within the Palestinian Christian community in Jerusalem at St. George's Anglican Cathedral as a response to the first Intifada or uprising. The paper mentions a few things that are particular to the Palestinian context that helped develop Palestinian liberation theology. 1, In the discussions that took place after the Sunday service led by Canon Naim, it dawned on the little flock that their Lord and Savior himself was a victim of an oppressive occupation. He lived in the same land we live in. And when people recognized and accepted his full humanity, now here I must say that, or not I say, Reverend Naim tells us that Eastern churches, the traditional churches, put a lot of emphasis on the divinity of Jesus. And he explains in the paper why. But when people recognized and accepted Jesus's full humanity, as well as his full divinity, it drove them back to the Gospels to study Jesus's life and teachings under the Roman occupation. His language and thought patterns also were Semitic like ours. And he lived in the same land, he breathed the same air we breathe. Now, questions that arose during those discussions, and I know very well because I was one of the people who very much enjoyed and was very much interested in those discussions. Some questions that arose: how did he live under the Roman occupation? What does Jesus say about resistance? What lessons can we deduce that can help us relate to the occupation forces? One of the key texts was the Luke passage, which is Jesus' social agenda, and which is not based on ethnicity. Luke 4:18-19, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has sent me to give good news to the oppressed, etc. Another key text was the Luke passage again about the persistent widow and the unjust judge and the cry of the widow, give me justice. Another one from the Old Testament is the book of Jonah in the Hebrew scriptures. It's a very good example of God's inclusive love for all people, even the worst enemies of the Israelites. Now, the areas that Palestinian liberation theology aims to impact. Number one, the reading of the Bible in a way that needed to challenge Western Christian theology. Two, Jerusalem theology. Assis Naim compares the exclusive theology on Jerusalem of Nehemiah and that of the writer of Psalm 87. Three, inclusive versus exclusive theology, all over. Number four, Christian Zionism. Those are the areas that our Palestinian liberation theology hopes to impact and tries to impact. Christian Zionism. Number five, ecumenism. Number six, interfaith dialogue. Now, all these are concepts for other Christians that are theological concepts. For us, they form the core of the problem, and they are a matter of life and death for us. And they impact our lives in every way. Some of the main features of this Christ-centered theology that relate directly to the Palestinian-Israel conflict. One, it is a theology of love and justice. It is a theology of justice with mercy. It is a theology that commits to truth. It is a theology of nonviolence. It is a theology of peace and reconciliation. It is a theology committed to champion the poor and the oppressed. It is a theology that is expressed through regular prayer and worship of God. It is a theology that looks to Jesus's life and teachings as guidelines that are essential to our everyday life. Now, the last part of the paper, yes, another thing that I'm not going to speak about because I don't want Omar shouting at me, is the vehicle that translated this theology into practice was Sabil. And there's a whole section that speaks about Sabil and the programs that translated the theology into practice, and there's a lot about that. And there's a very big number of books that came out of the very important conferences, international conferences that we held. Now, the last part of the paper was dedicated to Michael Pryor. It's a tribute to Father Michael Pryor. And you will very much enjoy reading this fitting tribute to Michael Pryor, whom Naim calls a friend, a liberation theologian, and a prophet. He also calls him a person of moral integrity, a person of courage, humor, wit. He calls him warm, lovable, down to earth, a good theologian and a very good researcher, a prophet with the ability to confront, to challenge, and change the discourse. I encourage you to read this booklet. It is very interesting and very important. So that's all, Omar. And if you want me to ask a question, I have a question ready for Assis Naim.
Yes, please.
Did I take more than 5 minutes? Less than, how much did I take?
No, not on Palestinian time. So please ask
the question. Assis, to what extent has liberation theology in general and Palestinian liberation theology in particular influenced theological education in seminaries, in Sunday schools for kids, and in adult Bible studies? That's the question.
Yes, please unmute yourself, Assis.
He's going to answer now.
Maybe I'll just say a few words about this, but I really need the question to be placed on the screen, if possible, you know.
No, I can't play, it's in my handwriting, and I can just read it again slowly. You want me to read it again?
Yeah, yeah.
To what extent has liberation theology in general?
Slowly. Yes.
To what extent has liberation theology in general and Palestinian liberation theology in particular,
yeah,
influenced theological education in seminaries, in Sunday schools for kids, and in adult Bible studies?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Thank you for it. Maybe it needs to be evaluated more scientifically. I don't have a full answer, but all that I know that Justice and Only Justice, my first book, has been used in as a teaching book in some seminaries or some theological schools. But it is, I have no way of knowing how that filtered down into Sunday schools, or how it has been translated into programs of Bible study in different churches and so on. So it's a very good question, and I think maybe it is something that Omar and Sabil today needs to pick up and try to really find out whether there has been any impact to Palestinian liberation theology. And some of you, some of my friends here, might know more than I do because of their relationship within their own churches. That's the way I would approach it. But it's an excellent question that needs to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Assis. The second speaker is Reverend Stephen Sizer. Reverend Stephen Sizer is the founder and director of the Peacemaker Trust. Anybody who meets Stephen Sizer can immediately sense that he is serious, he is dedicated, and he refuses to compromise on the topic of justice. He's always speaking truth to power, and he had his share of problems. And this is only an indicator that he is effective and courageous. So our dear friend, Stephen Sizer.
Thank you very much, Omar. I'm delighted to commend Reverend Dr. Naim Atik's cry out, do not hold back, because it contains the distilled wisdom of over 50 years prophetic ministry. I believe it's an immensely significant and urgent call, as well as a loving rebuke for the Western Church to find its prophetic voice and speak truth to power over Palestine. Because for far, far too long, our church leaders have been silent about injustice in Palestine. And in so doing, they have compromised our witness. They seem to care more about not offending Zionist friends than defending their sisters and brothers in Palestine. Having spoken to some, I know they are fearful of being accused of anti-Semitism. My answer to that is get over it. If so, it's their own fault for adopting so uncritically the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. I call it a pseudo definition because numerous lawyers have pointed out it's not actually a definition, because a definition, by definition, cannot be indefinite, which the IHRA purposely and intentionally is. It's designed to silence criticism of Israel by equating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. Naim refers to Kairos, Cry for Hope, a very important statement published by church leaders, including our friends within Sabeel. But I know of only one Anglican bishop in England who's endorsed Kairos as Cry for Hope. And that was 18 months ago, the paper was published. Only one out of over 100 bishops. That's why I'm going to encourage them to read Naim's Cry Out, Don't Hold Back, because he explains how Christians, especially her leaders, have quenched the spirit and choked the prophetic, caring more about personal interest than fidelity to God's truth. Silence in the face of oppression and injustice leads to self-censorship and complicity. And where we see this in the churches, we need to expose it. For me, Naim embodies what a prophetic ministry looks like. And we, you read it on every page of this important book. Is it lonely? Yes. Is it controversial? Most certainly. But is it impactful? Definitely. I mean, I can remember in November 2005 sharing in a conference with Naim in Canada on morally responsible investment. And the day before, B'nai B'rith organized a press conference to dissuade Canadian clergy from participating. And we went along and sat in the back row to find out what they were saying about us. And I remember the spokesman saying, "Who is Naim Atik? Where do they get their money from?" And I felt like standing up and saying, "We don't have any." And one astute journalist asked the question, why did you have to fly 3 clergy from New York to convince Canadian clergy not to attend the conference? It's not very subtle. But why go to such trouble and expense? Because they were in panic mode, because Sabeel was challenging their apartheid narrative. They clearly took Sabeel seriously, because then as now, Sabeel is a prophetic voice standing peacefully and non-violently against oppression and injustice in Palestine. For me, that's what this booklet is all about. And that's why I was so excited to read it, because Naim provides short Bible expositions offering a clear, Christ-centered theology of justice and peace. He shatters the illusion that somehow Jesus was apolitical. And it includes the testimonies of contemporary Palestinian Christian leaders who, as faithful martyrs, have shown courage in challenging the injustice and oppression of Israeli apartheid. I found it deeply inspiring. It's also challenging observing the names of leaders he leaves out, but we won't go there. Let me quote from a short passage in the book where Naim quotes Archbishop Desmond Tutu. He says this: "Have our Jewish sisters and brothers forgotten their own humiliation? Israel will never get true security and safety through oppressing another people. Israel has 3 options: revert to the previous stalemate filled with hatred and vengeance; 2, exterminate all Palestinians; or 3, strive for peace based on justice, withdraw from the territories and establish a viable Palestinian state with secure borders." I found Cry for Hope do not hold back, particularly valuable in outlining the practical steps we need to take to recover our prophetic voice, fulfill our God-given mandate, and bring about reconciliation in Palestine. And I will be using this valuable resource in future lectures and presentations, and I hope you will also. But I want to leave the last word to Naim, and this is how Naim concludes the book, Cry Out, Do Not Hold Back. Achieving a just peace for the Palestinians can be done if we are willing to stand and face together the internationally recognized illegal occupation. The challenge before our church leadership globally is to recognize the evil nature of this morbid occupation and to confront it head on using the power of prayer and nonviolence. Let us remember the plea of Palestinian Christians expressed in the Kairos Palestine document and addressed to the churches of the world. Are you able to help us get our freedom back? This cry is a word of faith, hope, and love from the heart of Palestinian suffering. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Sizer. Do you have a question for Reverend Naim?
Yes, I do. Naim, if you were to summarize all the passages you cite in Cry Out, for the benefit of our participants today, what would you say is the most significant passage that you go back to that encapsulates everything that you've written about in this booklet?
Assis, you are on mute. Please unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Stephen, for your words. I appreciate it very much. You know, this paper has been written over many years in many ways. You know, I have updated it continuously because it reflects my own frustration, my own agonies, you know, why the church has not really risen with great power and with great commitment to address this terrible issue. For me, it's been very clear that injustice has been done, that the Palestinians have been oppressed by what Israel has done. And, you know, I still struggle with this. And in fact, I was thinking recently that I need to share some of this booklet with Jonathan Kuttab, who is now our FOSNA's person working on justice and maybe trying to look at some of the ideas that I mentioned in this booklet, you know, and what to do with it, you know, in our struggle for justice and peace. Yeah. So it is the production of a number of years, you know, in that sense, you know, and I've shared it with other people, some of my friends, you know, like especially with Brian Greaves, you know, and talking about this thing. So this is, my heart is right here. I mean, it really reflects where I am in my thinking, in my heart desire, in my prayer life, in my commitment for justice for our people in Palestine and Israel, and so on. So, but going specifically to what you've said, you know, I think these perfect texts that I think Cedar mentioned, you know, are still there. You know, I was ordained deacon in the Church of Nazareth, in Nazareth, Christ Church Nazareth, and above the altar in Nazareth is that wording of Jesus, when he said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, that remains for me an inspiring message coming from Jesus himself, to work for justice for the oppressed, the liberation for the oppressed people. So that continues. And I still remember when I was kneeling before the altar, and I was ordained deacon at that time, and looking at those words and remembering my father had already died, and he knew that I was going to study, to be a servant of Christ in the church. It was an amazing experience for me that keeps coming back to me with that. And I still hope and pray to God that somehow, inspired by such words coming from Jesus himself, that I can find the community, the friends that share that vision, so that we can really work together today, not only speaking, I'm so tired of speaking, we need some action as we try to really do what we can do as a church. We are called to be prophetic, and so thank you for raising this issue. And I commend this small booklet, to people to read it, because it really reflects, my own personal vision, and more than a vision, I guess, my cry, for justice. So I can say so much more, but I think this is enough. Thank you, Stephen, for your introduction.
Thank you, Assis, and thank you, Caesar, for this good question. We move to the third booklet, and the booklet will be introduced by Reverend Kerry. Reverend Kerry Ballinger is a pastor, from the Lutheran Church at the Redeemer Church in Jerusalem. There's many things missing in Jerusalem, but not clergy or church leaders. In my opinion, the only pastor in Jerusalem that really speaks, when she speaks about Jerusalem, she uses her 5 senses. It's very clear with the photos that she posts. Everything attracts her, the small details attract her attention in Jerusalem, whether it is the fruits and the vegetables that are being sold at the street, whether it is the empty streets of Jerusalem or the full streets of Jerusalem. So it's a pleasure to ask Reverend Curry present her perspective on the document, on the booklet of Reverend Naim.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm so honored to be asked to offer these thoughts, especially because I am not a Jerusalemite, and to speak on the significance of Jerusalem as someone who is really a newcomer. I've been here for 8 years, but as we know, history in Jerusalem is very long, and I could live here my entire life and not know everything about this place. So I really am honored to be asked to give a few comments about this article, this booklet. I have to say I really appreciated this booklet about Jerusalem, and I think the first thing that I appreciated was how it began, which is talking about the etymology of the name of the city itself, which I had never really spent much time thinking about, because we have many ideas about what the name of Jerusalem means. And Reverend Atik says it doesn't actually mean city of peace. And I think that's something that I think many people have heard and have assumed. And of course, we know that neither etymologically or in reality is it a city of peace today. It's not the city of peace. It has the potential to be a city of peace, but it is not yet today. And I noticed that, it talks about this religious significance of the city, starting from the Canaanite period through the development of Judaism and Christianity and Islam. And I was thinking about my experience as a pastor who welcomes people from around the world to our congregation, and how disappointed people sometimes are or shocked when they experience the reality of what they have known religiously as the city of peace. I can think of this one mother and daughter who came. They were Black Americans who had saved up really a life savings to come and have this experience in Jerusalem. And they came to me at the church door in tears, saying, we didn't know. We didn't know what was really happening here. We just didn't know. Their churches had not taught this to them. And so for them to come here on a pilgrimage and see Jerusalem as it was, and see the way that their brothers and sisters in Christ were being treated, was very, very difficult for them. And this is not the only case that when this has happened for me. And so I appreciated how this began. And I was thinking then again, as who would be the audience for this very concise but informative book about Jerusalem. And I think that it would be very important for people preparing for pilgrimage to this place. And maybe especially for pastors or priests, religious leaders who are preparing a group, maybe they should be reading it. But also I could see this, Reverend Atik, as being good as a study or discussion guide for a group before traveling, as they're preparing to come here, so that they would not come and be in tears hearing for the first time, but that they would have a greater understanding of what's going on in the city and in this land. I appreciated how you talked about the meaning of the city for Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and how they are so different. This was really important for me. For example, you stated, and I quote, that the city, the land, and the people have become one for many Jewish people. They have become one, the city, the land, and the people. And I think I've experienced this in my time in ministry here, where this is what causes us to have struggles to criticize the state, because the state for many Jewish people has become God. The state has, I had one colleague, Jewish colleague, who said to me, if you criticize the state, that would be like me criticizing Jesus for you. And I thought, wow, I mean, that's huge. That's a huge statement. And I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong, but I think you clarify that in here to say this is important to know, that this is how many people experience Jerusalem. At the same time, I appreciated how you mentioned that for Christians, the resurrection makes every city holy, because we have said that God is not bound, Jesus is not bound even to the tomb. And this means that all cities are holy. Jerusalem is still holy in a unique way, but God, it was not, you said that not until the 5th century that Jerusalem was really recognized as really belonging to Christians. And then finally, I noticed that you talked about Muslims. For the Muslim faith, Jerusalem has been holy from the beginning of that religious tradition. And I really didn't understand that as well until I read your booklet. So I have to say, as I said, I have much to learn, only 8 years living here, but I learned new things reading this very informative booklet. You make a special note of the significance of Jerusalem for Palestinian Christians. And this also has been my experience here. And I think for me, the first time that I experienced the Holy Fire, for example, I was taken aback a bit as an American to see Christians carrying Palestinian flags, because for me, from the country I'm from, nationalism and religion are so often tied together in a very scary way. And we've seen that play out in recent years as well. And so it has taken me some time to understand how those things are really tied together for Palestinians in this place. The sense of being Palestinian and being Christian, it's very different than it has been playing out in my country. And so I want to ask a question then. for you. This is the question I have. And maybe it's coming specifically from my American perspective. So we have this theological understanding as Christians that for Christians, all places are holy because God is not bound to any one place. That Christ is risen and therefore the world is holy. And maybe that doesn't just come from resurrection, but from creation and incarnation. But just to be specific, because Christ is risen, God is not bound to the tomb. And at the same time, Jerusalem and this land are so very important to Palestinian Christians. It's so very important. And I know very well that my Palestinian friends and colleagues are proud of being the ones to carry the cross and carry the witness of Christ in this place. And so I wondered if you have anything to say about that tension and how we hold that together and how are you specifically as a Palestinian Christian hold that together, those tensions between the reality here and our theological convictions. Thank you very much. I definitely commend this and will be sharing it with people who are coming to visit this place.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary, for what you've said. You know, when I retired, and started looking at my papers, and I found I have a huge file that had to do with Jerusalem. And the first thing I thought of, maybe what I need to do is write a book on it, you know. And then I still have those. I decided against that because I know that there are a good number of books that have been written about Jerusalem, and I could not really see how I can leave an impact with all the things that have been already written there, you know. So it has not been easy. But then when I decided, you know, to write this booklet and put it together, and the different sections, including the Bible study at the end, I thought, you know, maybe this is the way I need to go, especially at the end, you know, when I looked at Psalm 87, which has impacted me and impacted my own theology. I thought that's great. So I was completely absorbed, I guess, by the fact that every one of our three religions in Jerusalem can make a very good case that Jerusalem is unique to it, including Judaism, including Islam, and including Christianity. And for me as a Christian, I would say Jerusalem is unique for me, but I can accept when a Jew or a Muslim says Jerusalem is unique for him or her, whether Jewish or Muslim. And so at the same time, you know, as a Christian, and because of Jesus, obviously, you know, Jerusalem continues to be very, very significant for me. And that's what I really wanted to share with others. And that's why, you know, because I lived in Jerusalem for many, many years, you know, and when I heard some extremists say Jerusalem is Jewish or Jerusalem is Muslim, I hated for anyone to say Jerusalem is Christian, only because Jerusalem is beyond that, you know, it's above that, above that. And So I was wrestling also with all these myths and with all these cliches and all these things. But, and that's what I really tried to present. I don't know whether I'm answering. I'm talking about the reality of the situation is that we have to share Jerusalem. We have to share because it is unique in the whole world. It is unique. And the problem is that Israel thought that they are the best, you know, but they have failed to make Jerusalem unique by Judaizing the city of Jerusalem. And that has been a great tragedy for the Jewish people, you know, instead of using or capitalizing in the fact that now they occupy Jerusalem and they have a chance to really make it something really unique for all the people of the land. They have not done that, you know, and so it is, it's a great tragedy. And so I hope that this booklet will raise again this important question, you know, and try to somehow in a creative way, we will come to a point where Jerusalem can be shared, you know, for all its people and for the world, because there is also the international dimension, which we cannot really forget. Thank you again for all that you've done, Carrie. I appreciate your words.
Thank you, Assis.
Thank you, Assis. And thank you, Reverend Curry. Next, we move to our good friend, Jonathan Kuttab. Jonathan Kuttab is a co-founder of Sabil and Palestinian Liberation Theology. He is currently executive director of FASNA. But at Sabil, whenever we take a decision, there's always a discussion, and it's important for us to get consensus, and we eventually reach consensus, but after a long process. Until we have a big problem at Sabil, we have a difficult group visiting, or we need something that we really require advice, and immediately everybody says, call Jonathan, call Jonathan. So Jonathan is always the person that we call when there's a serious problem at Sabil or a big challenge. And definitely, I mean, it's not a coincidence that the topic of his booklet is religion, politics, and intolerance. 3 big problems in Jerusalem and in Palestine today. So, Jonathan Kuttab.
Thank you, Amar. This booklet, this study is a very valuable discussion of one particular issue, which is intolerance and religion. For me, when I read it, I had to remind myself how Sabil really started. Sabil was really an attempt to deal with the issue of religion and politics. The issue of how do we make our Christian faith relevant to the political situation in which we are living. And since that time, of course, I've been very involved in issues relating to activism, working for justice, for nonviolence, for peace, for reconciliation, and have been very, very conscious of the abuse of religion in promoting intolerance. So for me, when I read this book, it was almost a reminder of how valuable Reverend Naim Atik is, because he is not just a Palestinian and a Christian and an activist for peace and justice. He's a scholar and a theologian, and he takes those things seriously. So when he handled the issue of intolerance in the different religions, he dug into the history of intolerance in each of the 3 major religions, very objectively, very carefully, and with a sense of integrity rather than trying to use history and religion to justify a political end. and he reached a very, very, really disturbing conclusion. It reminded me of George Bernard Shaw, who once wrote that nobody who really believes his religion can be tolerant of anybody else or anybody else's religion. I thought it was just a pithy statement that George Bernard Shaw is usually known for. But Reverend Naim Atik says, look at the history, read the texts. The truth is that each religion, as it describes and teaches about God and about the faithful, the believers, and about others, contains some very, very disturbing elements that provide for intolerance. Because if you are preaching the truth, and if the truth is divinely mandated by God, who has given you that truth, then it's kind of hard to be tolerant of others who preach or believe different truths. So I don't want to spoil the book for you because it's really worth reading. It's a very powerful booklet. But basically, the conclusion of Naim is that when religion is combined with power, when you become powerful and in control and still maintain that your regime or your country or your government or your authority stems directly from one particular religion, then the results are intolerance. Whether you are Jewish, whether you are Christian, or whether you are Muslim, you end up being intolerant of others. And the conclusion that he basically gives, well, he asks the question, can a state be really Jewish or Muslim, and I will add, or Christian, and still be fully democratic and provide equality for all? Somehow, he says, religion, when imbued with power, has a hard time providing democracy or equality for other people. So in my very limited time, I want to urge everybody to read this book and to use it, especially for the intellectual ability to look at things objectively, not as we would like to see them, but as they really are. It's a very valuable book. But I do have a question for Reverend Naim Atik. I know he speaks about the solution being pluralism, having mutual trust and acceptance of the other, that is probably the way we need to go. And that's how we need to look at the political situation in order to remove the sting of intolerance that, in his view, is really embedded in all three religions. I would like to ask Reverend Naim Atik to give his thoughts about an alternative viewpoint. And that viewpoint would say that, look, there is that element of intolerance. But don't all three religions at their root move in the opposite direction? Namely, when Christ says, my kingdom is not of this world, when he refused to establish an earthly kingdom, when Judaism, especially after the destruction of the Second Temple, moved away from a territorial-based religion and made the synagogue, the community, the ethical basis rather than the temple, the center of Judaism. When even in Islam, the concepts of otherworldliness of God's total sovereignty, of Islam leaving things to God to determine them. I mean, every religion has some element of otherworldliness. Wouldn't that be the opening for people to move away from the intolerance? Because as you said very correctly, Naim, intolerance comes when we combine religion with power, with authority. But don't religions all have implicit in them a prophetic rejection of earthly power and earthly authority in favor of a divine, cosmic, heavenly, universal sovereignty of God and his rule over the affairs of people? Isn't that the direction maybe? I know I speak as a Christian, I find that the way to go. The separation of church and state, that is really very basically part of Christianity, despite the fact that since Constantine, we have been tempted to go the way of empire instead. That is my question to you, Naim. And I definitely urge everybody to read this very, very interesting book about religion, politics, and intolerance, especially as it impacts Israel and Palestine.
Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate again. I mean, I remember many times Jonathan and I have been engaged in discussions over many difficult issues. And I think, I hope that this booklet can raise, I mean, you've done a tremendous job in raising some of the questions that need to be discussed. I think we need to discuss these things. It's a dilemma for me. It's a dilemma. I don't know. I mean, sometimes I tend to think, I agree with you, the separation of the church and state. I think many times that I'd rather live under a secular rule rather than a religious rule, including Christianity. I don't want a Christian to live under a Christian government, in that sense, because of the tendency, because we have this tendency as human beings to discriminate against other people, and so I could see it, and I hope, as you have mentioned, I hope that I've tried as best as I could as a human being to really be fair in trying to look at the intolerance in every one of our religions, including in our Christian religion, in that sense, And I think it is very important maybe to discuss this, and try to complete this is like a works in progress, this booklet that needs to be developed much more, and to see where the weaknesses of it, where the strengths are, and how can we really talk about it that way. It is very important. So I thank you for your thoughts, and I don't know which way we need to go, but definitely, what Israel has proven, that Israel has not really been able to really manage a democracy while still Judaizing the place, the Palestine, and so on. So it is very relevant to what we are living under these days in Israel Palestine. So hopefully this is again a book that can help us address these issues. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Assis. Thank you, Jonathan. We move next to our good friend, Meta Floor, who is currently now at the Tent of Nations. I know it must be very cold where you are, Meta, and thank you for being with us tonight. I remember Meta Floor when she first came to Sabil as part of a volunteer program, internship program with her church. And when she asked, what should I do? How can I help with Sabil? And it was very interesting what Reverend Naim said. He said, if I remember correctly, he said, change the Netherlands. In a way, it is so, in a way, it's so beautiful. In a way, it is also somehow it is like it's such a huge job, you know, it's to change the Netherlands. It sounds like as if it's Thomas going to India or Mark going to Egypt. But what really was inspiring is that Meta said yes, and she immediately started doing her work, and she has done great work since that time. And this is something beautiful about Sabil and many communities of faith, but especially at Sabil, that we believe that the impossible is possible. And we work with passion and with naiveness, and that's truly a blessing. So Meta Floor, a past staff Sabil at Jerusalem, and also part of the Friends of Sabil Netherlands, who is currently now at the Tent of Nations doing what we preach. Meta.
Thank you so much, Omar, for your very nice words. And thank you so much, Naim, for having invited me to be here. And now, good evening to all of you. As Omar mentioned, I had the privilege to work with Sabil in Jerusalem for over 5 years. And I'm still very grateful for all the things I have learned during this time. And I still keep learning from so many people who work for justice, for a better world, for everyone. First, I would like to congratulate Assis Naim with the collection of his writings, among which the Sabil Christmas messages. I really hope that many people around the world, and especially in Palestine, will read these messages and reflect on it during this Advent time, around Christmas, and during the rest of the year. They truly reflect on the spirit and resilience of Christmas, the hope of Palestinian Christians for liberation and freedom, and the joy that comes to all of us at Christmas. During my time at Sabil in Jerusalem, I had the privilege to celebrate Christmas many times with both the Palestinian Christian community and the Sabil family. The Christmas dinners, the joy and power of Christ, who was born in Palestine, but also Jesus living all his life under Roman occupation, rejected by people of power. This taught me that Christmas is not a feast of romantic simplicity, but reflects the miracle of God sending Christ to this world, not to start a new religion, nor to support the rich and wealthy, but to suffer with the oppressed, stand in solidarity, and give hope and joy to those excluded. This is what I learned when I lived in Jerusalem and became part of daily life of Palestinian Christians, to read the gospel through Palestinian eyes. And this is what Assis Naim is doing in his Sabil Christmas messages. He inspires people of faith to read the gospel through the experience of Palestinian Christians, their hope, their fear, their pain, and their tears. And when I was thinking about a question to you, Assis Naim, I would like to ask you this following question, but perhaps all of us can reflect on this question during this time of Advent. What if Jesus decided to come back to Bethlehem this Christmas, just for a day, and you had a chance to meet him? What would you like to ask him or to discuss with him? I'm very curious, so I would love to hear your ideas about it, Assis.
Thank you, Maitland. It's a very important question, as you mentioned, that to all of us. But let me begin by saying something about these Christmas messages. You know, those of us who are pastors, we probably have the same experience. You know, every Christmas you have to preach about Christmas. And sometimes after a while, especially those of us who have been pastors for a long time, you know, what can you really say that is new or that is stimulating to the congregation? And so I chose these several Christmas messages because they can help maybe pastors or clergy with some ideas, you know, on this. And at the same time, I'm trying really to be true also to my own calling, you know, in terms of to really look at what God has done through the coming of Jesus Christ and the incarnation, you know, at Christmas time. So that was there. But and I hope that those, again, pastors and clergy might find these Christmas messages stimulating for their own thinking as they prepare their sermons and their messages for this Christmas, you know. But then comes this question which Meta raised. And, you know, I'm thankful for Meta's presence with us, because when she came to Sabeel, we were all aware that that we have a small Friends of Sabeel in the Netherlands. But the Netherlands was, for me, the most difficult place to have Friends of Sabeel, because most of the people, I say most, and I mean it, you know, I mean, I don't think I'm wrong. Most of the people were very much perceiving the situation from a Israeli or pro-Israeli perspective. And so Cedar and I can give you stories about times in which we argued the whole question of Palestine from a theological perspective in the Netherlands. You know, I mean, we spent hours doing that, and it was not easy, you know, for this. And yet we were having an emerging Friends of Sabeel in the Netherlands, you know. And then Meta came with us, and she helped us very much. She was our liaison, you know, between Sabeel and the Netherlands, and was able really to do a tremendous job in that. But you know, I think Jesus today, if it comes to Bethlehem, probably will be crying as we are crying today at what's happening there. And looking around Bethlehem, seeing all the settlements that are choking the town of Bethlehem, and all the lands that have been confiscated by the Israeli state, you know. So Jesus would be very upset. And, you know, there are all kinds of cards that have been painted and drawn, and, you know, about that the people would be even stopped from even coming or entering Bethlehem, you know. And there are the checkpoints. We have the checkpoints there that prevent people, many Palestinians themselves, from even going to Bethlehem and so on. So I think I hope Jesus would want us to continue to raise our voice for justice, for peace, for equality, you know. And I think that's the way I would see Jesus still urging us to stand for what is truth, what is true, and what is just, you know, today. So I appreciate your thoughts, Meta. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Meta, and thank you, Assis. We move now to Reverend Don Wagner, a retired pastor, professor, and past National Program Director of FASNA, and his memoir, Glory to God in the Lowest, will be published around Easter 2022. Reverend Don Wagner is a wonderful person. Everybody who knows him loves him. Honestly, there is, when Jesus said, you know, it's the kingdom of God is for like those children. Honestly, you feel there's a child in every one of us, but you can immediately feel it in Reverend Don Wagner. He's passionate, he's naive, he's courageous, he's willing to break every barrier. He's a wonderful guy. You feel very much relaxed when you're speaking with him. You feel that, you know, when you're around him, you're going to get in trouble. That is something that you know for sure. They say, there's a saying that says, you know, your best friend is not the one who's trying to get you out of jail, but is the one who's sitting next to you while you are in jail. And I think Don Wagner is the person who refuses to leave jail and remains committed to his friends. So our good friend, Don Wagner.
Thank you so much, Omar. That was very generous and kind. And I'm just humbled and really grateful to be able to share with you. I've learned so much from Assis and continue to learn from all of you. You know, we're lifelong learners, and I find my theology constantly being challenged. I look around and see each of you as presenters and people from around the world, and you know, this is wonderful. Let me focus on this fabulous essay. I just found this brilliant, Assis. And I know it's something you've probably updated, and I want to recognize someone who's often not mentioned. I think Tina maybe had a hand in doing some editing and some work. So this last section, Liberation Theology as a Test of Authentic Religion, is really wonderful. And what it does, it provokes us to get to the core of the issues of what our beliefs and authentic religion is. It names some of the problems, and it calls us to action. And I want to end with some of that. It's very fresh, and thank you so much for it. You begin, Assis, in this chapter with a critique of theologies of domination and oppression. I mean, this is so timely as we see authoritarian nationalism and states rise, and not just in the US, but around the world, and you certainly are dealing with it in Palestine. You focus here, I think, on one of the cores of the problem is, how do we understand God? And you developed that beautifully. Is it a God of militarism, authoritarianism, a God who advances apartheid, who supports the exceptionalism of one chosen people, or maybe two? No, you say it's the opposite. You call us back to Jesus, our prophetic responsibility to the lowest, to those who are suffering, to those who are dominated. So this gets us to the core of religion and authentic religion. But we have to think through our sense of God. And here I think we naturally go to Jesus and the prophets, who challenge us and take us in the right direction. Authoritarian nationalism and the apartheid system is a false religion driven by an ideology. And would I be too bold as to say it's heresy? It's a form of idolatry. You don't precisely say that, but the hint is there. A tribal God is not who we believe in, who we honor, and who we are called to follow. The essay concludes, and I'm leaving out a lot here, with saying the test case for authentic religion is what we do. How we live, how we hope, how we inspire others by our lives, by our action. We won't allow injustice and the bankrupt forms of Christianity, the idolatrous forms, to dominate. But that demands of us costly solidarity. And that's the phrase you take us to. So I just want to raise a couple of ideas of the costly solidarity. Are we willing, like Bonhoeffer, like many of you around the circle, to pay the price of costly solidarity, to challenge Zionism, Christian Zionism even, as forms of idolatry? And I think we have to figure out, and that's one of my first questions for you, Assis, how can we get this out for others? I love these little booklets. That's a brilliant idea. One thing I think we could suggest is, could the Fazna groups, the Friends of Sabeel around the world, have Zoom seminars, maybe a series on each booklet? And then can we take that into churches and seminaries and promote the study? This would be one thing. And I'd suggest that we maybe read it side by side with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, forms of international law. Just the first article in the Universal Declaration: all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act toward one another in the spirit of sisterhood, brotherhood. There used to be a time when we would read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in schools. That's long gone. Maybe we need to bring it back. But we can bring it back with Matthew 25, the Beatitudes, and these 6 booklets. Let me close with a couple other thoughts. Dr. Gutierrez, who this was first written for, the father of liberation theology, challenges us. How do we really love our neighbors and even our enemies? And he said, as we liberate ourselves, we must liberate our oppressors. That may be the toughest challenge we have. How do we liberate the others who are oppressing us? Now, I'd like to close with this thought. Michael Pryor, who we mentioned in the first one, became a dear friend of mine. I met him at the International Conference of Sabeel in Jerusalem. And one time I was in London, and Michael, you know, used to like to go out to the pub late at night. So we went out and had our Guinness and would do theology. He was working on his last book, and he looked me in the eye and he said, Don, for the rest of my life, my goal is to dismantle Zionism in my lifetime. And I add, how about Christian Zionism too? to dismantle Zionism and Christian Zionism in our lifetime, that is one of our challenges. And these booklets may be the challenge of how do we get this out, get people into them, is a vehicle you've provided for us. So my questions are, any thoughts on how do we promote this? Get people into it, move people and inspire people to action, like Michael Pryor. And then Naim, would you go so far as to say that Zionism, Christian Zionism are forms of idolatry and heresy? And how can we raise that issue, if so, the issue of Christian Zionism in particular? It's a Western construct of false theology, and mainly we in the West are responsible. How do we declare it a heresy? And is that going too far? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Don. You've given us so much and so many good suggestions. And hopefully that Fazna and Sabil are listening and trying to really find out how to really respond and how to continue to benefit from a discussion on some of these topics that we have been talking about this in this Zoom. You know, so I appreciate that. And here I also like to say, and you mentioned Gustavo Guterres, but I really need to say that this paper I wrote because I was invited by, I don't know the person, but I was invited to contribute to a Festschrift for Gustavo Guterres. A Festschrift, as many of you know, is a volume of writing in honor of someone, you know. And so the Friends of Gustavo Guterres, the Liberation Theology founder, wanted to write a Festschrift. And so I was invited to write a piece on that. And I wrote this piece, which Don introduced. And in all my writings, I need to confess that I always checked, or I always asked Cedar Duaibis to help me reflect on what I've written and to challenge me, and we would discuss these things. So Cedar has been a great help to me in all my writing. And for a good number of years now, Tina Whitehead has been helping me with administrative work, and also as a thinker with me and the person that reflected on my own writings. So I'm appreciative of what they do. And thank God we have in the works now a number of other booklets that I'm working on, again, from my own research and from my own, so hopefully in time, we will share with you some of those things. And if, excuse me. So hopefully in time we can see whether Sabil and Fazna can maybe take some of the suggestions that you have made, Don, and try to really, but I share with you, the more I reflect on Christian Zionism in its core, the more I feel that it is really a form of Christian heresy, you know. And so I don't mind being challenged on that, as I'm sure you do the same. And you have even a greater knowledge of the topic of Christian Zionism than I do. But, and there we have people like Stephen Sizer and others And I think maybe we need to look at it from that perspective nowadays, and its impact, its continuous impact on the whole question. But there is, I think we really need to continue in community, working together, trying to really use, by the grace of God, I was able to do these. I continue to try, so long as the good Lord give me health and mind health, that I will continue to really contribute to this, you know. So thank you all for being part of this time together. I appreciate any questions, any feedback, any suggestions through Omar and Sabil. I want to thank Sabil, and especially Omar and the staff, and then Fazna and Brian Greaves and all the friends at Fazna for all their help and work. And so I appreciate that. And I appreciate your prayers and your support as we continue to challenge each other. You know, we are brothers and sisters in community, trying to really to study and to reflect on what it means to be servants of Christ in our daily life today. So with that, I turn to Omar and use whatever final points that Omar has to help us with.
Thank you, Asir. It has been almost a good hour and a half meeting together, listening to friends, reflecting and learning together. For the books, people have been asking on the chat. You can receive the books in two different ways. One way, if you can go to the Sabil Fazna website, and I'm placing the link again to www.fazna.org/Fazna bookstore. The 5 booklets, one booklet includes 2 booklets. You can buy each booklet for $1 and get an electronic version of it. If you'd like a hard copy, like many of us, please write to Sabil. We will be sending this information again in a mass email to everybody who attended this meeting or registered to it. If you write to Sabil, we will mail you the booklets of your choice. It would be wonderful to take 6 different booklets. Otherwise, some of our speakers might take it personal. And we will let them know what booklets you've ordered and what booklets you haven't ordered, because they're all for the same author, but it's the fault of the speakers, maybe. Did not. So we will share the information. It's $5 per booklet, shipping included. And please do also help us with promoting the booklets. They're wonderful. We want to encourage Reverend Naim. One of the exciting things that that really brought us condolences when Reverend Naim decided to retire is that he's going to be spending more time in his writings, and that is something where he needs to invest more. And we should all appreciate the gifts that Reverend Naim is providing us. We don't want to go over an hour and a half. So if somebody would like to share or would like to ask a question, we'll allow just for a few questions. Hopefully that we will, it will not take much time. So please do raise your hand electronically. If for the people who are new to Zoom, on the bottom right of the screen, there's reactions, a smiley face with a plus. If you click on it, it has the button of raise hand. So yes. Ernesto, please unmute yourself.
Yes, I am here.
Yes, you have a question?
No?
Oh, okay, sorry. I thought you have raised your hand.
Oh, sorry.
Ginevra?
Willing.
Yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify, it's $1 a copy for the digital and $5 for the hard copy?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. Very reasonable for such knowledge.
Thank you. We want the word to go out. We will not fine you if you make a bigger donation.
Okay.
Yes, Daryl.
Back in 1977, there was a conference for 10 days at New York and Union Seminary. I think that's where I met Don Wagner a year before. But anyway, at this conference was Gustavo Gutierrez. And it was a 10-day conference on liberation theology. And we had it from the point of view of Blacks, of women, and of course, Gustavo Gutierrez. And it was hosted by Robert McAfee Brown, who is a very famous scholar, but quite a Zionist in effect. And I went to him after the classes were over, and I said, Dr. Brown, something's been ringing in my head all week. Who's talking about Palestinian liberation theology? He said, well, I don't know, maybe one of the rabbis across the street at Hebrew Seminary, I don't know. And I said, if I could get someone to speak with you, I had in mind Fayez Sayegh, a Christian Palestinian who is the Arab representative at the United Nations and who would debate very well without notes. And unfortunately, Fayez was not in. And but this was the beginning, I think, of at least raising the question with Robert McAfee Brown, who I don't think who ever really came across for Palestinian liberation theology, but to meet Don Wagner the next year, and then to meet Naim Atik in St. Louis at the Presbyterian General Assembly, and finding out here is a leader of Palestinian liberation theology. So for me, this day has pulled a lot of good thoughts and memories together. But to ask, where is Palestinian liberation theology? And a whole 10 days of liberation theology was not even in the mind of those who were there. And so Gustavo Gutierrez has been a mentor to so many of us, thank God.
Yes, that's right. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. With these words from our friend Daryl Myers, we come to an end of this event. We will be sending you emails. We're going to be pushing for these booklets to go out. So please do not put us in your spam folder. We're just doing the work of justice. We appreciate it, and thank you for everybody who has been part of this session. Thank you, Reverend Naim, and thank you, our friends and community of supporters. May we continue to have a blessed Advent and Merry Christmas to all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Omar.
Christmas.
Stay healthy, everybody.
Thank you, Omar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Naim,
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Stephen,
Thank you.
bless your heart.